Welcome to Reading the Bible Together and to Genesis chapter 17, which continues to have importance and relevance to the daily lives of people the world over. And let's see why. But just before we get into it, notice the passage of time. Genesis thinks it's significant, and so should we. Genesis 16 closed by telling us Abraham was 86 when Ishmael was born. Chapter 17 now tells us that Abram is 99. 13 years have passed, 13 years about which we know nothing. Only that Hagar is back in the household and apparently subservient to Sarai. There is, as far as we know, relative peace in the household. Now, also, as far as we know, God has been silent for those 13 years. The last Abram heard from God was the torch and smoking firepot covenant pledge in chapter 16. After all this time, Abram must certainly assume that the promises of God would be fulfilled through Ishmael, that maybe Sarai's replacement plan would be used by God after all. Particularly since at 99, fathering an additional child is not first and foremost on Abram's mind. Yet here comes God again with a reiteration of the covenant in much the same language as in several times previously. But there's a change. Previously, the covenant was one way. All the commitments and responsibility was on God's side. Remember, it was God alone who walked between those divided livestock. Now, however, God demands a response. Why now? Why not before? Had Abram become complacent? Had the promise drifted from his mind? Remember how in Genesis 15 we were told that Abram believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. Well, now that belief is about to be challenged with a call to action, with a sign of Abram's participation in the covenant. Now, if I were preaching a sermon, and these Bible studies are different than sermons, if I were preaching a sermon, I would say that faith is an important first step in relationship to God. But then there is action, a way in which we demonstrate our faith. That's what's going on here in this passage. But back to our story. Abram's challenged with a sign of his participation in the covenant, and it's not a simple sign. Abram and all his male descendants are to be circumcised. Those within his family circle encamped now, and those yet to be born. The ones who are yet to be born are to be circumcised on their 8th day of life, and God is serious. He says, "My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." Now note the play on words. Those who do not cut off will be cut off. Now this physical commitment and sign of participation in the covenant is followed by faithful Jews to this day. And incidentally, circumcision is practiced within Islam as well. So, what does circumcision mean? What's it all about? Well, Rabbi Moshe Shapiro explains. I thought it would be helpful to have a Jewish angle on this most Jewish of acts. He writes, "Today, by performing the act of circumcision, Jews perpetuate the covenant and make their children part of that eternal promise. The Brit Milah, covenant circumcision, performed on the 8th day reminds us that Jewish survival is not a natural phenomenon, but a supernatural one. Jewish survival defies the laws of nature. This explains why the mark of circumcision is made on the reproductive organ. It symbolizes the idea that the Jewish people's seed will never be destroyed. The secret to Jewish continuity lies in the Brit Milah, which strengthens one's personal commitment to God. Once this is achieved, the communal commitment will emerge on its own. In his covenant of circumcision, Abram vowed to teach his descendants to serve God with perfect devotion. This is the essence of Brit Milah. It represents the individual's personal commitment to God. One's communal identification with Judaism is indeed a positive thing. But the mitzvah of Brit Milah teaches us that unless there's also a personal commitment, it will not endure. Well, thank you, Rabbi Shapiro. That personal commitment is reinforced in Judaism with the bar mitzvah, usually celebrated at age 13, where an individual's faith commitment is affirmed. In Christianity, baptism has replaced circumcision as the rite of identification within the family of God. The Apostle Paul, among others, makes this clear. For those baptized as infants, confirmation takes the place of the bar mitzvah as the time of faith commitment affirmation. Again, usually in the teen years. Well, back to the text. We've reached the point where Abram's name is changed by God to Abraham. I've mistakenly been pronouncing Abram as Abraham every once in a while. We often come upon name changes in the Bible at moments of great importance. For instance, Jacob's name was changed to Israel when God reaffirmed the covenant with him. Now, Abram means exalted father, while Abraham means father of many. The name and the promise go hand in hand. And now it's Sarai's turn for a name change. God says to Abraham, "Now as for Sarai, your wife, you're no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Now the names Sarai and Sarah both mean princess, but with Abraham's name change, Sarah's name change firmly includes her as central to the covenant. It's not only the men that matter. Sarah is of equal importance. Now, Abraham's reaction to all of this is not the pious response we expect. When he hears that it's up to him and Sarah to have a baby, he falls on his face and laughs, we read, and says to himself, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Well, fair enough, I'd laugh too." Facing the impossibility of such a thing, Abraham tries one last time to make Sarah's plan work. He says to God, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing." Remember, by this time, Ishmael is now 13 years old. He's every bit a beloved son to Abraham. Now, God says that he will bless Ishmael, who himself will be the forerunner of a great nation, but that the covenant made with Abraham will be with the child of Abraham and Sarah. Now, incidentally, it's at this very point that Islam and Judaism part ways. Some 2,600 years or so after the Abraham event, Muhammad, in about 600 AD, who was a merchant and very familiar with the teaching of both Jews and Christians, with whom he had many dealings, Muhammad proclaimed that he and his fellow Arabs are the true descendants of Abraham's first and eldest son, Ishmael, and are therefore the true inheritors of the blessing of God. While claiming Abraham as their father, Muslims today will not accept the claim of Isaac as the covenant-bearing line. Also, in terms of Christianity, Islam recognizes Jesus as a great prophet, but not in any respect as the Son of God or as resurrected. Back to the text. Abraham, we are told, follows through on God's command, circumcising both himself and Ishmael, as well as all the males within his household. Everyone was fully committed. Believe me, that's commitment. Now, next time in chapter 18, Abraham will receive 3 very important visitors, and it will be Sarah's turn to have a laugh. We'll see you then.